Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing very well, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Tatiana Garavito, and I am an organizer, a facilitator working on issues around race, migration, and climate justice. And I currently work with an organization called Tipping Point UK, leading on the care and repair work. And I'm joining in from Colombia, from the land of the Pijao people, the Quimbaya people, and just very close to the mountains. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization that is hosting this event. It's called Makan, a Palestinian-led educational organization that works to strengthen voices for Palestinian rights through workshops, online resources, and events like this. Makan hosts these talks to create a space that brings people together to hear insights from expert speakers like the ones that we have today on issues related to Palestine and social justice, and to engage in critical, thought-provoking conversations with our community, yourself. So thank you so much for being here. And the other organization that is putting or hosting this event is the organization that I work with, called Tipping Point, which is an organization that supports grassroots groups to build their collective power and organize for bold and radical action for systems change. We currently coordinate a few networks, Stop Cambo, which you might have heard in the UK, the Define Climate Chaos, and the Climate Reparations Coalition. I talked about just very briefly about the speakers that we, and you might have seen it also from the information that we have sent, but we have Muna Dajani and Hamza Hamouchene here with us today. Muna holds a PhD from the Department of Geography and Environment at the London School of Economics. Her research focuses on documenting water struggles in agricultural communities and their settler colonialism. She's a senior research associate at the Lancaster Environment Center, where she works on a project entitled Transformations to Groundwater Sustainability, exploring grassroots initiatives of intergenerational holistic groundwater governance. She has contributed to numerous studies on the hydropolitics of the Jordan and Yarmouk River basins. She also co-leads a collaboration project documenting the story of the occupation of the Syrian Golan through developing an online knowledge portal featuring collective memories of the popular struggle in the region. Muna is joining us today from Palestine. Welcome, Muna. It's really, really nice to have you here. Dr. Hamza is a London-based Algerian researcher and activist, a commentator and a founding member of Algeria Solidarity Campaign, Environmental Justice North Africa, and the North African Food Sovereignty Network. He's currently the North Africa Program Coordinator at the Transnational Institute. His work is focused on issues of extractivism, resources, land and food sovereignty, as well as climate, environmental, and energy justice in North Africa. He's the author and editor of 3 books and has also contributed to chapters to various other books. His other writings have appeared in Africa is a Country, The Guardian, Middle East Eye, New Internationalist, Open Democracy, amongst many others. Hamza is joining us from London, and it's also really, really nice to have you here. I'm very honored to be in conversation with you too. Behind the scenes, this event could not have been possible without the care and the love that Makan members of staff have put into this. So I would like to say thank you to Mehdi and Sarah that are going to be also, that are here with us today, helping us with various different things. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here and making this event possible. And Just before we start this conversation, we wanted to provide a bit of a background on today's topic. I'm sure many of you will agree with us that climate change and ecological collapse are the most significant challenges facing the world today. We see it in the news. We see governments talking about this, and also movements around the world. And by some estimates, they might even, climate change and ecological collapse might even threaten the survival of entire communities in various parts of the world, which could become also inhabitable. To some extent, this is already happening and has been happening for hundreds of years through the process of colonization. So to speak about it as something that might happen in the future, rather than something that is already happening, is to speak of a lack of urgency. For decades now, there's been a consensus among many, including governments and activists, that climate change is a reality and that a response is required by everyone. But the nature of this response is a terrain of significant conflict. How we choose to respond to climate change, what we choose to prioritize, who we choose to prioritize, who we choose to pay attention to, are all political questions. Even the historical causes, processes, and actors we hold responsible are political issues, but sometimes they get side, or they are ignored in political debates. Mainstream proposals talk about green growth, net zero, and suggest a simple switch to renewables to solve the crisis. There is, of course, no discussion in most of these spaces about capitalism, about colonialism or imperialism, and even the basic commitment to a common but differentiated responsibilities, which get very little service, let alone any action. Because of this, many activists argue that rich countries, the global north, are simply using the green transition as a way to secure and further their dominant positions in the global economy, resting on the exploitation of much of the world's population and resources to continue the same cycle. Another vision, and which we are going to be talking today, is something that is called, or some call, climate justice. This is not the term that is used in many places. People might call it different things in many places, but there is a lot of consensus around this idea of climate justice, which seeks another completely different path. In its radical version, climate justice campaigners argue that both mitigating and adapting to the climate crisis might be done alongside a vision for social transformation that addresses different forms of injustice and inequality, and not simply greening existing patterns of violence and exploitation. And based on demands and proposals of social and political movements across the global south, climate justice is about justice, which sometimes really gets forgotten in conversations. The word justice in climate justice. So justice for what? Justice for indigenous communities, land reforms, food sovereignty, climate reparations, and more, which we will be exploring during this conversation. And you might have seen this, that Palestine has been seen and expressed as a climate justice cause, with the issue of land and at its forefront, and the recognition that Israeli colonialism has been an ecological crime. But what about the surrounding region? COP27, as some of you might know, will be held in Egypt this year in November. And this discussion is in part being held now, today, to commemorate and for us to think about COP27 happening very soon. So what will be a radical climate justice program look like for West Asia and North Africa? These are some of the conversations that we're going to be talking about. What are the challenges facing activists in the region from the political classes in their own countries? like Egypt and others. In Egypt, climate activists have condemned the repression they have faced whilst Egypt hosts COP27, which is a very striking contradiction. So what lessons can we learn from some of these dynamics that we're seeing around the world? So in this discussion, we want to identify the key ecological challenges facing the region, how they can be mitigated and adapted to, what obstacles stand in the way, and what it means to address the climate crisis in a way that promotes more just and equal societies, not just in West Asia and North Africa, but the global South and the world as a whole. From droughts and water shortages to crop failures and the collapse of food systems, the region faces severe challenges. And we are going to be exploring what some of that means for communities and our movements. So this talk will address how activists from the region think about climate justice. What is this idea of climate justice? The obstacles they face within their domestic contexts, and what a radical internationalism will look like. I will also be talking about some of my experience or things that I have seen here in Colombia and in this region, in this, giving a perspective from here as well. We will be situating Palestine and the local region within a broader global perspective, taking into account some of the wider challenges facing poor countries around the world and the failure of dominant narratives to reckon with global inequality and the historical processes which got us into this mess in the first place. So with this background, and sorry that I've been speaking for a bit long, I'm very, very honored to invite Muna and Hamza into this conversation. Again, thank you so much for being here with us. And the first question that I wanted to ask you both is about the term of climate justice. I think this is something that, it's getting a lot of attention and has been getting a lot of attention for a while. But I feel that sometimes people, as I said earlier, kind of like ignore the part where it says justice in this. And so I wanted to hear from you about what it means for you and what are some of the principles that climate justice rests on. So wondering if maybe, Muna, you can start, and then we'll pass it on to you, Hamza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I'm really honored to be here today speaking with you and Hamza, and wanted to also echo my thanks to Makan for again hosting and organizing this talk, to Hussein and to Mehdi and Tara for making it happen. Indeed, thank you, Tatiana, for the introduction. That was really very, very full on just kind of really exposing us to what's happening, what has been happening, what we have been enduring as indigenous communities, as communities in the global south that have been facing injustices that have been multi-layered. For me, without actually taking it too long, I wanted to highlight two things about climate justice that I find to be interesting and powerful. One of them is kind of how climate justice as a concept, as a discourse, is actually putting at the forefront the enduring, the coloniality that we live under today. So climate justice doesn't really only address issues of distributive justice, like who will get what and who is bearing responsibility for the mess, as you said, that we are in. But we are actually thinking, when we speak of climate justice, we are actually taking it further than technical and managerial solutions to the climate change crisis, and really putting at the center of it all and at the heart of it all the indigenous communities and communities of the global south, historical colonial legacy, and tying it very closely to climate change. A lot of scholars, whether the indigenous scholars and scholars from the global south, like Kyle White and Farhana Sultana and others, have echoed this heaviness this unbearable heaviness of climate coloniality, has spoken a lot about how environmental injustice, and it hasn't really happened just since the Industrial Revolution, but has been happening for indigenous communities for a very long time. And the environmental change that colonialism has caused to communities cannot be ignored, has to be put in context. So we're speaking about that type of justice, the justice of generational trauma, generational loss of place and loss of connection to place that coloniality has caused. So that is one thing that, for me, climate justice entails. Another really important thing is climate change is about politicizing climate change. It's about moving it beyond, again, this managerial understanding that climate can be sorry about that, can be sorted in those type of solutions. So another thing that's really important is that when we speak about the UNFCCC and all of the conventions and the forums established to address climate change and its impact, we don't hear justice. And if it's now becoming more of a discourse that, these international forums are bringing into the picture, they're depoliticized. So here is the role that we're going to speak about today of activists and scholars to actually oppose that depoliticization of climate change and depoliticization of climate change policymaking, and putting at the forefront that it is an issue of generational justice and generational trauma. So this is what I wanted to add to the point about climate justice that you raised.
Thank you so much, Muna. And yeah, let's maybe, Hamza, if you want to come in.
Great. First of all, thank you, Tatiana, for the kind introduction. And again, I'll echo your thanks for Makan and for Tipping Point UK for hosting this event and giving me the platform to share my ideas alongside yourself and Muna. I think before I'll add to a small or brief definition of what I mean by climate justice when I talk about it, is it's worth looking at the origin of the word. Where did it come from exactly? So I think it came in the early 2000s from environmental organizations. And its origin is about linking social justice to geographically specific climate and environmental issues. So it has not been separate from anti-racism struggles, from struggle against the financial and trade dominance of the global north over the south, and from the struggles for global justice movements and the anti-globalization movement that we've seen in protest against the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 1999 in Seattle. For me, climate justice involves, first of all, the recognition of the historical responsibility of the industrialized West in causing global warming. And also it needs to take into account the disproportionate impacts that we are currently seeing, the different vulnerabilities and also capabilities of responding to the climate crisis. And it needs, for me, like a radical interpretation of climate justice, because there are various interpretation and definitions. It focuses, let's say, on the questions of the role of the relations of power in causing that climate crisis in the first place, shaping the response to it, and also determining, who bears the burden. So in that respect, it is not disconnected from, questions of class, race, gender, and issues of the colonial legacy and, the ongoing capitalist exploitation and imperialist domination that we are seeing. So for me, I see it as, how can I say, a challenge to the global business as usual that is protecting the political and economic elites worldwide, that is protecting multinational companies, that is protecting military regimes, and it needs to see like a radical social and economic transformation. And I think I'd like just to finish to note on the concepts, because first of all, the concepts can be hijacked. So when you see like Angela Merkel talk about climate justice, I don't think we are advocating for the same climate justice like some of the political leaders and some of the people talking about becoming suddenly climate champions right now. And then also, as you said, Tatiana, at first, some people in different contexts do not use those words, do not use those concepts. So like throughout my field work and research, at least in the Maghreb region, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, those words in Arabic, and I'm sure maybe it's the same thing in Palestine, like al-adala al-munakhiyya, it's odd because it doesn't have roots in the struggles in the region. But of course, we can learn from those concepts and maybe adopt the content and the principle of those concepts, because I believe that they have some emancipatory and liberatory content. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Oh, thank you so much, Moon and Hamza, for these contributions. And yeah, I think as you've been saying, it's about how we understand the world and how we came to be in this moment that is really, really important to understand when we're talking about climate justice. And just also to like say that movements and the worlds in which we kind of like navigate are very pluriverse, and sometimes they don't fit under a single banner of climate justice. But I think we also might need to bear in mind that for some people, they might call it post-growth or degrowth or eco-socialism or post-capitalism. I think the decolonization also talks about climate justice in, at its core, abolition, ecofeminism. So I think also to understand that climate justice has been used as a framework to understand the world and to be able to talk about root causes and the big challenges of the system in which we live today, but that many people might call it different things in different places. And I think we should be always kind of be able to hear those stories as well. So thank you so much. And the second question I wanted to ask is, if you can maybe talk about the idea of green colonialism or green imperialism, maybe from the context, from the spaces that you work on. What does that mean for you, and why do you think this is important for people to reflect on? Shall we start with you, Hamza, this time?
Yes. Green colonialism or green neo-colonialism, or some people call it ecological imperialism. Like the way, at least I'll define it, is for me like it's the extension of those colonial relations and the exploitation, the dispossession, as well as the dehumanization of the other to the so-called renewable era or the green period. And this is accompanied by the externalization of socio-environmental costs to the peripheries by creating what some people call sacrifice zones. In terms of the green transition right now, the energy transition that is taking place globally, it is taking place in uneven terms. So it is happening primarily in the global north, and it is predicated on the ongoing extraction of base metals, rare earth minerals like lithium, cobalt, and graphite, and so forth, to manufacture solar panels, wind turbines, blades, electrical batteries. And the question is, where would these resources come from? They would be coming from countries like Bolivia, Chile, Democratic Republic of Congo, Morocco, where the environmental destruction and workers' exploitation would intensify. So basically, what we are seeing the same capitalist and imperialist system, but with a different source of energy. That's what they are taking us to, from fossil fuels to green energies to renewables, while the same energy intensive production and consumption patterns are maintained, and the same political and economic and social power relations remain untouched. So for me, this is how I define green colonialism. Some others prefer to use green grabbing in order to mention those dynamics of land grabs that take place in a supposedly green agenda. So from the dispossession of indigenous communities of their land in order to do reforestation projects, towards confiscation of land, communal land, to grow agrofuel or biofuels, and then to the building of solar plant and wind farms on agro-pastoralist lands without their proper consent. And there are so many examples, like in the North African region. In Morocco, for example, there is the Ouarzazate solar plant. It has been praised in 2016, just before the climate talks, the COP22 at the time. They were hosted by Morocco in Marrakesh, as one of the biggest, solar plant. But then you scratch under the surface, you'll find like an ugly story. It is a land grab. So the solar plant was built on 3,000 hectares without proper consent of the Amazigh agro-pastoralist communities. It is a public-private partnership, which is a euphemism for privatization of the profits and socialization of the losses. It contracted huge debts, $9 billion in debts with Moroccan guarantees. The project has been losing money since its inception, 80 million euros, which are pocketed by Moroccans themselves. And then even looking at its green credentials, it's not as green because it's using a lot of water to cool down the system and clean the power. So there are hugely problematic. There is another project that is being developed now, and it's going to be the biggest, apparently, hybrid solar plant, combining two technologies, the solar concentrated power, CSP, and photovoltaic. It was due to start this year, but there have been delays, so I think it's going to be launched in 2024. That's middled. And some agro-pastoralist communities have been protesting against it. And some of them called it an occupation because they're not seeing the benefits at all. No jobs, no development, nothing for them. So if we can call these projects, let's say, green grabbing, some of the projects that are taking place in the occupied zone in Western Sahara can be clearly described as green colonialism because they are taking place on the occupied territories of Sahrawis and in spite of their will. And those projects entrench, the occupation, entrench Moroccan colonialism of Western Sahara. And there are various other examples that we can go through, like the hydrogen hype that is being promoted by the European Union right now, to push some North African countries, including my home country, Algeria, to produce green hydrogen for export. So we are seeing the same neo-colonial dynamics. Always it's, the energy security of the other that primes, and the other happens to be in the global north, right? The richest north. So that's why I see that those terms of colonialism and neo-colonialism are useful in our analysis.
Thank you so much, Hamza, for reminding us about, the logics of the system in which we're operating, which is, logics of extraction, logics of exploitation, logics of violence that, continue to be present in some of these so-called solutions that, these institutions sometimes want to promote amongst people and groups and communities in the global south. So thank you so much for this and giving us, very important examples. Just wondering, Muna, if you want to come in to share what those terms are mean for you, also based on your local context and your research.
Sure. Thank you. Sure. Hamza did a great job in describing those two concepts really well. And I wanted to add one thing about climate colonialism that is not only materialistic in terms of land grabs and the fact that it's exploiting resources, continuing the extractivist model of racial capitalism, but how also knowledge production is based on these colonial hierarchies, where who is actually producing knowledge about climate change, who is actually in the decision-making circles. The UNFCCC claims to be that, global platform and forum for, this important decisions about how to address climate change, but who is actually doing it, in what language is it being done with, and who is actually taking control of the narrative, of the discourses, of the actual narratives around climate change. And we find that what Hamza said in the beginning, when we actually try to translate, because usually that's what happens, is translate those concepts into Arabic, into other local languages, and we find, that detachment and that alienation between the actual concepts and the actual lived experiences, decades-long, lived experiences of communities, especially in the global south when it comes to climate change. So I think this enduring coloniality continues in the way we produce knowledge and in who is actually producing this knowledge, and this hierarchy of basically superiority of Western knowledge and policy making, and how it actually only travels to the global south. It actually comes to us in pre-assigned packages, in this checklist type of, policy recommendations that the UN produces, and how to become more green as a country. How is Palestine going to tackle climate change, for example? And it's tick the boxes that try to be as apolitical as possible, that shift the responsibility from, the global north responsibility for climate change to actually putting the responsibility on individuals, which is also a very dominant way of an approach for climate change activism, even in the global north, where individualistic actions seem to kind of be more important than political will and political action that decision makers can do. So this kind of narratives become very dominant. And then, of course, because of conditional aid and because of the involvement of these actors that Hamza has mentioned, the European Commission, other countries in the global north, and its domination in our parts of the world, we see that we only get these kind of prescriptive type of policy making that we need to only implement without actually understanding how it's detrimental to sovereignty, to the right to self-determination, to actual issues of authoritarian dictatorship, and so on and so forth, settler colonialism in the context of Palestine, enduring colonialism in occupied Western Sahara, and so on. So it's not only where green colonialism is seen about greening the north, the global north, at the expense of global south. I think in our context, in our region, we need to kind of further problematize what climate colonialism is. In the case of Palestine, evidently, it is a case of settler colonialism, settler colonialism that is still ongoing. It's a structural process that is still extracting land and resources in a way to exclude and eliminate indigenous populations and local communities, not only to take their resources, but to also disconnect them, uproot them from connections to those lands, memories to those lands and to those resources. So not only Palestine is a climate justice issue, and I see it, it's also kind of an enduring coloniality here that is happening on a daily basis, and it's attacking the materialistic aspect of plunder and extractivism, but also very much the psychological and the relational aspect to land and resources, especially that Palestine moved from a very revolutionary, cause to a cause today that is a state building and a nation state building cause that has also detrimental effects on how climate change is actually addressed and how it's understood here. So we speak about climate change, Palestine as a climate justice issue, but we don't also understand that Palestine is the whole of Palestine. We don't really speak about, Bantustans and, fragmented geographies of the West Bank or Gaza, but we speak about the wider Palestine, that includes all of Palestine. So these type of things get lost in the picture when we only speak of climate change as a Palestinian Authority issue. They are the ones that represent us at the UNFCCC. Of course, nobody is representing Palestinians that live inside 48, inside Israel, and like a lot of these discrepancies fall under the table, because we're speaking as nation states, as representative nation states, negotiating on our behalf. But we know that in our countries, under authoritarian regimes and settler colonial regimes, this representation is barely enough anyways. So I think this is one thing I wanted to highlight. Another thing, the greenwashing, of course. When we speak about greenwashing, again, it's not only about countries doing it, like Israel has been doing for decades, in terms of kind of transporting its technologies around the world as green technologies, but also, you know, how multinational it has become, how it's actually transcending borders. So basically, it's not only about Israeli technologies, but Israeli technology and multinational companies can operate in different ways and in different forms throughout the world, whether in the continent, in the African continent, whether in Latin America and others, and usually to detrimental effects to both the environment and local communities, because it's pushing for technological fixes, for intensified technological fixes, very large scale infrastructure that usually comes at the expense of indigenous communities, a right to access land and resources. And it's all about privatization as well at the end. It's giving, the control from settler colonial regimes. Now it's going to share it also with multinationals that, under the guise of development and sustainable development, they sell and they promote that type of technological fixes as apolitical, as guaranteed and efficient.
Thank you so much, Muna and Hamza, for sharing with us what you think green colonialism and green imperialism means, and why it is so important to really reflect on these terms, and when we're seeing like responses from governments and from some local actors. So thank you so much. I know that you've already started to talk about some of these in this, just answering this previous question, but I was wondering if you can say a bit more on the particular ecological challenges that the people in these regions in West Asia and North Africa face, and maybe a bit more on like how Palestine fit into the broader region. And I know, Muna, you've already started to address some of these, but I think it would be really good for people who have come to this event to hear a bit more about these like ecological challenges that maybe sometimes don't get as much attention because of how Western media works and the global dynamics, political dynamics. So just to say a bit more, and I can also share with you about Colombia, what's happening here. We just elected a government that is very interested in climate justice, but big challenges also that we have ahead of us. So Hamza, you want to say a bit more about the things that you've already started to address?
There is an acute ecological crisis in the North African region in terms of environmental degradation and pollution, in terms of the land exhaustion and the overexploitation of natural resources, including water. So you have a lopsided agricultural model, an extractivist agricultural model that depends on, is export oriented towards Europe, of course, cash crop monocultures that needs a lot of land and water resources, while most of these countries are food dependent, like Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt and Algeria, for example, are one of the biggest importers of wheat in the world. And the agricultural model is just lopsided, not working for its own people, and works at the expense of the environment and the natural resources, the rare natural resources that they have. So, and on top of that, there are the impacts of climate change. That are worsening day after day. You have desertification, you have droughts, repeated droughts, protracted droughts. Sometimes they last for a long time, recurrent heat waves, wildfires. It's becoming a huge problem. Like in my home country last year and including this year, we've seen fatal wildfires. We've never seen those before. So, and the IPCC report is saying that these events are gonna become more frequent and more intense. We're gonna see more sea level rises. So the sea level rises that we are seeing in the Mediterranean and the coastal erosion are one of the fastest in the world, especially the coastal erosion in North Africa. And the sea level rises are threatening even the existence of some islands like Jerba, Qarqna in Tunisia. You have the saltwater intrusions into fertile land in the Nile Delta, impacting, the agriculture, impacting the food sovereignty. So yeah, there are a lot of issues. We need to tackle them in a just way. And maybe I didn't mention question of water. Maybe Muna would talk about this. Question of water is a big issue in the region. So it's not just North Africa, the Arab region as a whole. Most of the countries right now are water poor, in absolute water poverty. And these problems are gonna worsen with time.
Thank you, Hamza. Muna, you want to talk a bit more about Palestine and any other challenges that you see also in the region that would be good for people here to know, be aware of?
Yeah, what Hamza has described also is very relevant to Palestine. The rising temperature, wildfires, of course, the fluctuation in rainfall and increasing occurrences of floods, and especially in such fragmented geographies like Palestine, where we actually see this inscribed into the landscape. Actually, Israel has for decades channeled water away from water courses. It has built dams and it has built reservoirs and changed the landscape of the country in such drastic ways that these events, the climatic change event, are being exacerbated for Palestinians. So the impacts of these events will happen on Palestinian lands, and this is coupled with a mismanagement, a systematic mismanagement of resources that is happening in all of the Arab world. All of the Arab world has very inefficient water management policies that has been inherited from colonial powers. If we look at, for instance, in our work in the Jordan River Basin and the Yarmouk River Basin, we look at the history of policymaking in Jordan, countries like Jordan, Syria, in Palestine, and elsewhere. And basically, we have this inherent, mismanagement that is still very dominant. This idea of conquering nature, this idea of controlling nature is still on the mindset of all politicians. Politicians have used it for decades to control and exert territorial sovereignty and to show power, to show kind of a nation state legacy. When we build big dams, when you actually invest in infrastructure that is not compatible with the livelihood practices of local communities, and it is to detrimental effect to both the environment and the people and the relations between people and environment and nature. So yes, in Palestine, of course, the water scarcity comes up as an issue, but we always say it's manufactured water scarcity. It doesn't really take lightly that we live in water scarce regions in the Arab world. We do. But we cannot also blame nature because this is the depoliticization of those issues. If we keep on following that rhetoric and discourse of saying, oh, our countries are water scarce, so this is why we need technological fixes. This is why we need bigger dams. This is why we need desalination plants, without really looking at, the big elephant in the room, which is the enduring colonial and settler colonial legacy of resource management, and the exclusion of local knowledge, of other worldviews and other perspective on resources. If we look at indigenous scholarship, again, we see such a rich perspectives and depth and width of knowledge about the relations between land and people that we have as well in the Arab world, but nobody has invested enough energy or capital into kind of bringing it more to the forefront and speaking about those connections that we have lost because of extractivism and because of colonialism and so we need to bring that picture back into our discussions and not just take prescriptive policies for granted at face value and try to kind of follow the wave, because it is global. Climate change is a global. It's framed as a global issue that we need to collectively work on it together, but also at the same time we need to understand that we come from different contexts. We come from underrepresented, underprivileged, and really destroyed communities. We are destroyed communities that are trying to stay afloat, that are trying to preserve cultural heritage and connection to our food production, but we are also very much consumer societies. We have become consumers. So what Hamza was saying about we are importers of wheat and all of these staples that for generations we have been producing in our countries, and today maybe less than 10% of wheat is being produced in Palestine. I'm sure there are similar numbers in Jordan, Algeria, and other places. And we have to understand that we are part of a very globalized connections with the world that comes at detrimental effects to our food sovereignty and to our identity and place-making initiatives that we are trying to do here by staying on the land, by preserving local seeds, by doing a lot of things on the ground. So yes, I did take the question in a different place, but this is some thoughts, and maybe later I'll speak about another example of about the Golan Heights, but maybe in the next.
Thank you so much. This was perfect, Muna. Thank you very much. I guess I also want to talk about, the context in which we are here in Colombia. And for some of you who follow global politics, international politics, we this year just elected a political party and a president that is has a very strong climate justice agenda. And, I think many people in movements and civil society have actually celebrated a lot of the, the work that he's proposing to do. But of course, you've been talking about, you've been talking about the legacy of the ongoing colonization that we're living around, that we experience around the world. So, some of the challenges that we face with this new government is, moving and transitioning to something else. And, one of the big challenges I see that the government here has is that this is not something that you could do alone, right? It's not something that only Colombia will be able to achieve, but it's something, it's a change, it's a transformational change that will have to be done collectively by our regions and so on and so forth. So, here in Colombia, for instance, at the moment, we have a big, polemic around the cost of petrol. So this government has just taken some of the the grants that were given to corporations during the previous government and also during the pandemic. And this has also meant that petrol for people will increase a little bit. So, I think in a context like this, to sort of like undo some of the bad that previous governments have done is going to be, really challenging for people to understand, and to see that the kind of systemic changes that we need are going to also mean changing our life, or like how we do certain things. We also have here in Colombia hundreds of extractivist projects. Very near where I am connecting from, there's Anglo-Gol Ashanti that has been wanting to exploit the land for gold, and this is just one of the many projects that that previous governments allowed, and kind of like, giving titles to corporations to come and exploit the land. That, it's stuff that has been happening, again, for hundreds of years. And here in Colombia, where there's, plenty of water as well, they are saying that hydroelectric projects are also a solution to some of the, the big issues, challenges that we face. So all of this is like stuff that the current government and movements as a whole have to, will need to work on. So there is a shift in how, we live, as well as understanding that there are, international global power dynamics that will need to be balanced in order for a country like Colombia to be able to, to sort of like adapt to the climate crisis. And our president last week was also talking about how we have the Amazon that has been seen like, its destruction. We have monocultures being, kind of like expanded in the Amazon, which is a lung that the world has, and is one of the main points of the new government's agenda. So lots of challenges. Of course, our contexts are quite different to like some of the things that you've been discussing, but in a way they're rooted in the same logics, right? The same logics of we can, do whatever we want to nature and nothing will happen. We can also exploit people and nothing will happen. We'll extract and continue to plunder. And it's just the same logic at, like around the world. So these are some of the challenges that communities in the global south have been facing for hundreds of years. It's just that right now we are seeing a global, climate crisis that's now, everyone is alerted, but this is like the ongoing violence that communities have been facing. So with this, I wanted to remind people in this event that we are going to be creating space for to hear from some of the questions that you might have. So this is an invitation for you to use the ask a question kind of like bar and to vote for the questions that you like the most. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'll come back to the ones that you ask in a moment. But the next question is around, with all of this analysis, reflection, and very, thought-provoking discussion, challenges, and so on and so forth, I wanted to ask you what climate justice will look like in the region. So like moving towards a more kind of like, to dream together, right? To like envision the kinds, or like also talk about some of the resistance that you are seeing in some of the places that, movements that you work with. I know that is challenging right now. It's not only challenging for, your region, but many regions. And Latin America or Colombia, I think this is the first time that we elect a left progressive government. So it was hundreds of years of, really horrible, kind of like a horrible political landscape. So I think it will, even if it's small, it would be really nice to talk about, what climate justice looks like in your region. And if you can you can talk about anything that you think has been giving you hope or inspiration. I think we can also bring that in a bit. Muna, would you like to start?
Sure. It's also very difficult to speak of like positive or things that we see that aspire us. But I think definitely there's always hope, even in the darkest of times. For me, I think what climate change should and will look like, because of all the great work that communities have been doing on the ground, is more grounded in the experiences of people, in the way they preserve and continue to educate and raise awareness about practices that tie us back to the land, that destroy this hierarchy of the anthropocentric approach to the way we're dealing with climate change and with environments, thinking that we know best and we're superior than others, and kind of really destroying that approach and moving beyond that. Climate justice will also mean that communities have the lead, communities have the say in how their resources are being used and developed. We don't want global solutions just for the sake of global solutions, because global solutions could also be privatization of the Amazon. It could be, turning North Africa into, green energy development for Europe. It could mean a lot of things. So thinking locally and critically and kind of really situating ourselves back and rooting ourselves back to the land and to the practices and indigenous knowledge that we have been, generation after generation have been, moving it along and making sure we preserve it and continue, but actually not romanticizing it, but learning from it and trying to include it in our lexicon, include it in our talks, in our discussions about climate change, in our future, aspirations to combat climate change. It should be at the forefront. So I think that is, and that is happening in Palestine. A lot of people are not directly speaking about climate justice, and they're not really saying, "Oh, this initiative is, achieving climate justice." But we're returning to the land. We're speaking more about food sovereignty. We're actually opposing, international aid with conditional international aid, and trying to think what actually works for Palestine and what doesn't. Of course, as you mentioned, it's not easy. It's not going to be an easy pathway, but it is happening on the ground, and people are actually rising up slowly but surely, and with very concrete steps. So this is how I imagine climate change, climate justice will look like, with a lot of voices for the people, and a very local understanding of what climate change is and how we should tackle it.
Thank you so much, Muna. I would love to live in your world where there's climate justice. Hamza, do you want to come in yourself now?
Yeah, hard to think about those questions in the midst of all the difficulties and the challenges in the region and in other parts of the world, and sometimes it's good to be inspired of what takes place in some other regions like Latin America. Maybe there is still hope. In 2010, 2011, there was hope in the region as well. There were the Arab uprisings, and then there was a second wave in Sudan, Algeria, Lebanon, and Iraq. But yeah, things are not going in the right directions in there, unfortunately. But for me, when I think about that question, I think there is maybe a long-term utopia. What do we mean by climate justice in the region and globally? For me, it's about decolonizing materially and epistemically, decolonizing knowledge as well. It's about democratizing our systems. That's very important. And it's about radically transforming the economic systems and the imperial hierarchies where the countries of North Africa or the Arab region in general have been inserted in a subordinate position in the global capitalist economy. So we reverse that for me, it's a long-term project, given the difficulties and the challenges and the balance of forces on the ground. I don't think we're gonna see that happening tomorrow or after tomorrow. I think that, but in the short term and medium term, there are things that we can do. Resistance continue. People rise and ask for the rights and for the distribution of wealth. There are counter-revolutionary forces all the time, but there are things that need to take place, at least to adapt to the realities of climate change, at least to advance rapidly towards renewable energy. And in here, we need climate reparations. Climate debts need to be paid by the richest countries to, the impoverished countries in the global south. We've been hearing in the COP process about climate finance that never materialized. And if it materializes in the form of additional debts. And I don't think that's right. It should be grants. It should be global transfer of wealth and technology. And that's, these are things that we could push for. There are things that we could push for, like reconciliation of debts from global south countries. These are things that I think it's easy to ask. And I believe that there should be huge public investments in the energy transition. That needs to come, of course, from money through the climate reparations, but we cannot leave that transition to the private sector or to multinationals, because their priority is to make profit, not to advance towards a renewable transition or transition that work for the people. I think these are just general thoughts, and I agree with Mona. Questions of food sovereignty need to be at the heart. Questions of energy democracy, sovereignty over resources, over land, the involvement of communities, the involvement of workers in very important decisions when it comes to adaptation to climate change, decisions towards renewable, because sometimes there will be tensions in that process. It cannot be linear. There will be mistakes in the way. But if we do this, with the politics of love, solidarity, care, I think we can go towards the right direction. Maybe that's too abstract, but that's what it is.
Thank you so much, both, and not too abstract. I think, I love hearing about your visions for worlds of reparations and memory, of radical love. I think you talked about intersectional solidarities, worlds, where we can connect, where we can live, and decolonial thinking, feeling lives, right? And evolution. So this sounds like all great, and I hope that for those that are listening to this talk, you can get a lot of inspiration and hold politicians and big institutions accountable to the kinds of worlds that we deserve. And they are different in many places. They're pluriverse, and I hope that all of you can continue to dream with us. We're going to leave this here to give people who have been asking questions here some space. And we're going to start with the person who asked, how can students raise awareness about the injustices taking place in Palestine, Israel? Is it possible we can have the assistance of this platform to raise awareness in the Social Justice and Peace Studies program at King's University College in London, Canada? So there's a bit of a question, I think, for Makan, and maybe another one for yourselves. So how can students, raise awareness about the injustices taking place in Palestine, what do you think people listening to this talk can do apart from taking action on the ground and continue to reflect on these topics? Muna, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really good question that we should definitely ask ourselves, and also people, students who are involved in Palestine justice societies always face, how do we actually talk about Palestine? How do we raise awareness about what's going on? And I always say, also comparatively, like Palestine is a global issue as much as it is an issue that is just about Palestinian and for Palestinians. I think what we spoke about today, kind of all of these connections that this globalized world has forced us into, that this the world of the coloniality that endures in our lives, in our experiences, needs to be uncovered. So I'm sure that every location around the world will have some sort of connection to injustices that are experienced in Palestine. So I think starting there and kind of, acknowledging, these connections is important. And definitely in terms of comparison, we've been doing a lot of really inspiring work, like speaking about, what happens in Palestine in terms of green colonialism and linking it to what's happening in occupied Western Sahara. Work that has been done, scholarship that has used comparative approaches to understand, the realities of communities there. But I kind of adding that layer of green colonialism, with wind energy projects there, with occupied Syrian Golan Heights, which is just a few 100 kilometers away from Palestine. It is northern Palestine in a way. Speaking, understanding those linkages that happen, understanding, the dispossession that is so common and so consistent across those different geographical spaces, and making those connections and speaking to louder audiences and speaking to, addressing those issues in larger contexts and going beyond the geography, I think is really important. So that's definitely one way I would encourage people to continue speaking about Palestine. As we said, Israel is also doing its greenwashing all across the globe. And there is a lot of campaigns that have started, like Stop Mekorot, and BDS has also done a great campaigns that have an environmental and climate justice center to those campaigns that we can also build on. And wherever we are around the world, we can raise those issues to people who are interested in the issues of commodification of nature, the privatization of water, extractivist industries. And so there is a lot of connections to be made. So these are kind of more practical ways to raise awareness. So, yeah.
Thank you, Muna. And I think if that's okay, Hamza, I'm going to ask you about taking this question a bit like broader, like how can people listening to this conversation show solidarity for struggles around the world, for Global South struggles? I mean, I think there's been a lot of conversation here about like the importance of talking about the root causes, about, always having an understanding or a lens from a colonial perspective, imperialist perspective. But what else do you think, maybe from your work, can students listening to this chat, I imagine in the UK, do?
Yeah, international solidarity is key, is crucial in the struggle for climate justice and a just transition towards a better world. This is for sure. We need to connect the dots between various struggles, between various geographies of oppression. That's given. For me, it's very important. The climate crisis is a global issue, and the answer to it needs to be global. The climate crisis is an issue related to the capitalist imperialist system. So the solution to it needs to be anti-systemic as well. In terms of concrete solidarity actions, I think first of all is raise awareness about what's happening, because the system we live in, the capitalist system, at least its nature, has a kind of a structure which is the center and the peripheries. The imperialist center, that what you call the global north, the rich global north, and the peripheries where plunder and dispossession continues. But those dynamics happen in the global north as well. There is exploitation in the global north as well. So we need to be aware of those things. So for me, realizing that the solutions that are being proposed could perpetuate existing, injustices, could perpetuate patterns of dispossession, needs to be emphasized. You can also tackle the multinationals who happen to have headquarters in the global north, especially London here, and raise awareness about the crimes that they are committing, about the dispossessions that they are involved in the lies. Now all the fossil fuel companies are talking about just transition and climate justice. So all of them are climate champions now. But in reality, what they're doing is something else.
Thank you so much, Hamza. And this just reminded me of Colombian's last very conservative, horrible president who was given a championship or some kind of like, for climate justice because he's now a champion and he's interested in the Amazon. So yeah, be careful with all of that. All of those lies that are coming up. But also to remind you, if you're in London, in the UK, there is a global day of action that activists and the coalition in Egypt has called for, bearing in mind that in Egypt there isn't a lot of space for activists to come together because of the local political context there. And this Global Day of Action is going to happen on the 12th of November. There's going to be a blog for climate reparations that will talk about international solidarity, that will talk about Palestine, that will talk about the murder of Chris Kaba and every, person that has died in police custody, and connecting all of these issues that are produced by a system, again, the same system that we've been talking about here. And with that point, I would like to maybe get another question from here, which talks about climate racism. So I wonder if maybe we can talk a little bit about what we mean when we say climate racism. Hamza, you want to come in first? I'm trying to be balanced in who I give the microphone to first. So yeah.
I feel that I've been talking too much.
You go. I think it's fine.
Climate racism. I'm not gonna attempt a definition here. What I know that we are living in a racialized world. There are racialized hierarchies in the capitalist system. Some people call it racial capitalism. That generates sacrifice zones when it comes to environmental and climate questions. So, for example, terms like environmental justice, they have been rooted in anti-racist struggles in the United States. So communities of color have been resisting, the dumping of waste, the pollution from refineries, from transport infrastructures, and that has been documented, that communities of color and their impoverished white people have been bearing the burden of those pollutions. So that struggle has been connected from the start, the environmental justice. And now when we talk about the climate crisis, we see the disproportionate impacts and burdens of communities in the global south. People are dying right now. People are losing their land. People are going into hunger. Some lands are disappearing. So those realities are seeing them. So those racial hierarchies are part of that system that externalizes the cost to the weakest. And I like always to, I don't know who said this, but somebody said that capitalism is a system of unpaid costs. Costs in terms of reproduction labor that's not paid. So mostly women do this in the world of today. In terms of the cost of the environment and nature. So we are plundering nature and plundering nature. And then also the costs that are externalized to the peripheries, to the global south through imperialism and imperialist domination. So yeah, those things need to be connected. Definitely climate justice is an anti-racist struggle. Climate justice is, a feminist struggle. Climate justice is an anti-imperialist struggle. That's how I see it.
Thank you so much, Hamza, for those beautiful words. Muna, do you want to add anything else to ideas
Anything
about
I
climate
add after
racism?
Hamza's great analysis is going to be little, but yeah, I would also, of course, agree with what Hamza is saying and say that we have to go beyond the concepts. Again, what we started with at the beginning, like when we speak about climate justice, we have to really understand that it can be appropriated, that it can be put out of context, that it can be depoliticized. So I think one thing about, to add to what Hamza is saying about climate racism, is that we need to also go beyond, you know, the distribution of harms and benefits to communities of color, for example, and kind of see what's beyond that, what's systematic, what is was actually, you know, what Hamza described, kind of racial capitalism and kind of the inequalities it's built upon and that it feeds on, and to really put it in that context as well, and not just go see it as just, you know, distribution of harms and goods. And of course, that's the case in Palestine and everywhere else we go. Yeah, and I don't know what else to add to that, but yeah, that's the point I wanted to raise.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. And yeah, I hope that those listening, you know, to this event kind of like can take away that climate justice is racial justice, and that, you know, as movements working for or around, you know, creating worlds without oppression, we need to repair communities around the world for the, you know, white supremacist violence of colonialism, ongoing colonialism, that have also, you know, created the climate crisis. So yeah, thank you so much for all your thoughts, beautiful words, beautiful dreams, beautiful visions, and very sharp analysis, you know, answering the questions today. I think we might have reached the end of our talk, and I'd like to really thank everybody who has been listening. Again, you speakers, for your time. And we hope that you are leaving this event with this, you know, willingness of, you know, coming together as people that are interested in climate justice, in worlds, you know, decolonial worlds and worlds that really work for everybody on this planet. So, and worlds that can repair communities that have been at the forefront of so much violence and pain and violence. So yeah, I think this is everything from me. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see each other hopefully at upcoming events. Thank you, everyone.